I've been looking forward to the reading tonight. We are delighted to have Harold here. And I know a couple of people have been talking to me, so I wonder if any of Harold's students, are any of Harold's students here? Okay. Thank you very much for being here. I know another friend of ours was I don't think she got here yet, but she was a student of Harold's, and so she really wants to be here. So we are delighted to have Harold here. You may know he's a lifelong resident of the Pacific Northwest. He's been an Army musician, played in an opera company orchestra, edited a small literary journal, taught school, traveled in Europe, and he says played lots of tennis. His poems have appeared in Hubbub, the Portland Review, Oregon Literary Journal, and various anthologies, among others. During a long teaching career, English and art, he has been active in music, sports, visual arts, and writing. For 2 years, he co-authored Fireweed, Poetry of Western Oregon. He's published 2 chapbooks, and his first full-length volume of poetry, Citizenship, came out in 2014. So there are copies of that back here on the table. They will be available for sale after the reading. He's also the author of a novel, The Fort Showalter Blues, which is forthcoming next year. Retired from teaching since 1995, Harold is a between wars veteran of the U.S. Army, where he served as bandsman in the 62nd Army Band at Fort Bliss, Texas. He and his wife Ann and son Miles are longtime residents of Portland's Irvington neighborhood. We are delighted to have them here. We're delighted to be hosting them. Would you join me in welcoming our poet tonight, Harold Johnson?
Okay, so it's good.
Thereabouts.
Okay, thank you, Tom, and thank the Milwaukie Poetry Series for inviting me to read in this beautiful venue. Nothing like being near water, huh? I'd like to begin with a sort of epigraph that I like to begin some poetry readings with, and a little memorial. This is by the great Polish poet Adam Zagajewski. Try to praise the mutilated world. Try to praise the mutilated world. Remember June's long days and wild strawberries, drops of rosé wine, the nettles that methodically overgrow the abandoned homesteads of exiles. You must praise the mutilated world. You watched the stylish yachts and ships. One of them had a long trip ahead of it, while salty oblivion awaited others. You've seen the refugees going nowhere. You've heard the executioners sing joyfully. You should praise the mutilated world. Remember the moments when we were together in a white room and the curtain fluttered. Return in thought to the concert where music flared. You gathered acorns in the park in autumn, and leaves eddied over the earth's scars. Praise the mutilated world, and the gray feather a thrush lost, and the gentle light that strays and vanishes and returns. In the memorial, after the shooting, gunshots heard round the Republic killed the sweet 6-year-old, 6 adults, and 19 classmates. One of those neighborhoods people create to feel safe. The shooter, a shaky neighborhood youth, killed his mother and finally himself. She was a singing child, a bird of song. Her father, a known musical master. He created a memorial of song for her. The big white house where Adam lived with the family guns stands deserted now. An imposition, aura of frozen breath about it. Spring will perhaps bring a wrecking ball through the green shutters and seasonal hope of raising wreckage at the constitutional root. Schoolmates sing for the recording. Some cry, but sing through it for her and the others, giving themselves to music's mathematics for bearing the awful. World War II, I was born a few years before World War II. World War II still somehow is the biggest thing that ever happened in my life. This is The Names of Summer, a War Memory. I suppose at one time I would have said it was the biggest thing that happened in my life besides baseball. But they sort of come together here. The Names of Summer, a War Memory, for Joanne Geddes and Jerry Conrath, two great friends who were baseball lovers. Early in the war, they began to show up on Sundays at the Washington Junior High School Diamond. The first baseball players I'd seen in uniforms, 20 or so, wearing white uniforms with red caps and stockings. At first, they all looked alike, a collection of toy soldiers. Their uniforms a big white lily that tore into particles when they piled out of the army truck they rode to the field. Japs, a watching neighbor growled. The corporal that drove the truck relaxed behind the wheel during games, flipping through magazines and puffing Camels. He counted heads when they reloaded. I hung out near the benches to drink in the hitting and catching and heard their talk, which was just like mine. I heard the pitcher's fear of Yamaguchi, a great left-handed hitter who often slammed balls over the right fielder's head clear to 8th Street, and he could punch it to left when he took a notion. Fujitani was a block of muscle behind the plate, in his armor that snicked and clinked as he worked. He could whip off his mask, sprint after a bunt, and fire to first or second in one motion. Duncan Matsushita's heartbreaking curveballs surprised the strike zone, and he seldom walked hitters. A loud-mouthed 9, I cheered the syllables of my favorites. Yamaguchi, Matsushita, Fujitani. They laughed that I could pronounce their names. No stranger to me than the Deuteronomy, Malachi, Ecclesiastes. I'd been hearing all morning at church. After a couple of Sundays, they drafted me as bat boy. Manager Sato gave me staccato instructions, how to retrieve the bats, how to line them up, how to hustle after foul balls that looped over the backstop and bounced into the weeds across Pacific Street. For the rest of the summer, I was waiting at the Diamond when the truck arrived and the players hopped out and started stretching, playing catch and fielding fungos. Sometimes a player didn't show up. I asked, "Where's Sadaharu?" "Oh, he signed up for the Army," somebody would say. And that's all they would say when somebody signed up for the Army. The war. During the week, I played ball, trying to imitate Kitagawa's nifty pickups at short, or Hongo's fluid throwing motion from left. And I heard news about the war, about how we had to beat the Japs, those funny-talking, slant-eyed sneak attackers on Pearl Harbor, which we were supposed to remember. I read comic books featuring heroic American Marines in combat against the buck-toothed, craven enemy in the islands of the Pacific. In one story, a group of Marines, victorious, found among other graffiti on an abandoned cave wall stick figures of ball players and the legend, "Baburusu stinks." Pentecostal Sunday morning sealed off the rest of the week, and the town, except for a few gas stations, rested. First came Sunday school, then church, with all the singing and praying, testifying, and the collection plate. Some weeks people got baptized. Every week I suffered a crawl across the Sahara of the sermon, trapped between fat saints who fanned themselves and chanted, "Preach, brother." It would end, but I knew there would be waiting while the grown-ups finished laughing, shaking hands, and hugging. Then we cruised home in the old Chevy. I tore into the house, changed clothes, and sprinted to the Washington Diamond. The players arrived in their fresh white uniforms with the red caps and stockings. Balls popped into gloves. A just-used glove felt warm, pliant, and protective to my hand inside. Glove to nose, I inhaled the scent of linseed oil and leather. After warm-ups, Manager Sato gathered the players at home plate and read off the two lineups. The suspense was worse than waiting to break out of church to see who would be on which team. How will Yamaguchi handle Matsushita's curveball today? Will Kitagawa be playing short or second? I know I'd put Tanaka in center more often. The sparkling uniforms picked up streaks and smudges of green and brown by late innings. The catchers would be covered with dust, and orange stains from the leather of the masks printed their faces. There was a Sunday before the game. Yamashita told me, "Sadaharu's in Italy." "Fighting in the war?" "Yeah," he said, "fighting the Germans." I could imagine Sadaharu doing swift, heroic deeds for our country. And there was the Sunday Manager Sato said, "Well, this is our last game, Hallie." And school started, and other seasons, other wars, and rumors of wars washed over that summer. But now, here come the names: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Inaba, Nakasone, Yamaguchi, Watanabe, Morita, Kitagawa, Shimura, Fujitani, Matsushita. That was in Yakima. Water has gotten to be a huge consideration. And I guess it was a bigger consideration that one realized. Yakima is in central Washington, and it's really pretty dry. The sun comes out every day. At least that was my experience as a child. So that the soil was very rich, and irrigation became a big thing for the area, and there was a lot of irrigation water around, which we as kids were warned against because people drowned in the canals too often. This is the Rosa Canal. On the dry side of the mountains, we learned to worry about it. "Stay away from that cistern," my aunt said when we visited the ranch. A girl down the valley fell in and drowned. A seventh grader who passed me pencil drawings in class didn't make it through the summer, the gravel pit. The first time I looked into the river below the bridge, one of my buddies said, "Water draws you," and I left off watching the carp. "Irrigation feeds the nation," county posters cried. And it did bring a rhyming wealth of cherries, pears, and apples out of the dry slopes. But Cousin Chester, 14, disappeared in a ditch with a sweet-sounding name. Smokers at the Pond. Small town, working class kids didn't have too much to do. If you're a boy, you're going to go out and play sports, right? Baseball was still the national game. And if you didn't play baseball or know something about baseball, where I grew up, you were sort of out of it. And the other thing was you might do a little fishing. There was fishing around. This is a little bit about that. smokers at the pond. Man, they'd walk past the junior high field like they had no idea DiMaggio, Williams, and Musial were back from the biggest war in history. Walk past, sucking in smoke from Lucky Strikes. Cousins, Tony Hauser and Leo Hines. They didn't know that Joe DiMaggio smoked in the dugout. Away from the ball field, I fished from the bank of the pond that years ago was a gravel pit. Never swam. Colored boys didn't learn to swim in our town. Across the water from me, they skinny dipped, shiny white in the sun splash. James, a boy not long from Louisiana, approached and studied till they took a smoke break on the wild grass beside the water. James pulled off his clothes and jumped in, right away flailing in the panic of a drowner. Tony and Leo dropped their smokes, swam out and brought their catch to shore, wobbling black, shiny rubber between them, spitting water. The cousins steadied him with pats on the back and husky sounds. James tugged pants and t-shirt over his wet body, shivering, found his shoes, and, head bowed, waved goodbye. Ditched butts relocated, Hauser and Hines sat down to dry. Old James actually became a doctor over in Seattle. Much later, his father was the preacher at the Church of God in Christ. Okay. Little family history. Lunch break. I think one thing on reflection that I learned from the experiences described here is something about cultural difference. My father was from Alabama. He sort of took off from home at age 14 from conditions that were actually not much different from slavery. His parents had been born into slavery, actually. And he, somewhere along the line, I don't know if he was underage or not, but he joined the Army. He spent some years in the Army. He was a Buffalo soldier, down at Fort Huachuca, where black troops used to be stationed. And he was still very much a Southerner, while his kids were having this experience of growing up in Yakima, Washington, going to school, and, that was all they knew. Just after the war, there was a slight influx of black people from Louisiana, Texas, and so on. And, we'd never seen such people before who talked so differently, A potato sack was a toe sack, And a woman sent me to the store for her one day, and she told me to get her 6 bottles of soda water. And I go there and order 6 bottles of soda water, and they gave me pop, Pepsi-Cola. And that was a rather interesting adjustment. Well, my father was very popular among these younger black Southerners who had come up. He got some of them jobs working for the city. My dad was a garbage man for the city. And they thought he was a great guy, and I was sort of a punk as a teenager. And I didn't quite realize what was going on, I have to say, but it sort of comes out here. Lunch break. They didn't know what was happening, of course. I was a know-it-all, 14-year-old. At 14, for his long service as one of the town's garbage men, I disowned my father, who never mentioned baseball before the Brooklyn Dodgers hired Jackie Robinson. Sunny October noon. Home from school for soup. I find him and his crew in the kitchen eating bacon sandwiches to the tune of Red Barber and Mel Allen telling the series, Dodgers against Yankees. They wait for Jackie's at-bats. But the crew has got it all wrong and they're thinking about the game. The Yankees are going to win, I offer. Go on, boy, you don't know what you're talking about. Years of devouring numbers backed my belief in Yankee weight. I do too know, I countered. Boy, you don't know nothing, they said. Ain't gonna be nothing but a pimp, he said. I hurled the stone back. That's better than being a garbage man. Their shouts blew me out the door. Oh, I was right about the game, but let me tell you, the walk back to school was long and lined with blood. Yeah. Small town news. This is not getting too heavy on baseball, but I hope there's more than baseball going on here, which is what I want to say. Stealing the shortstop's shoes. I guess this is in the confessional mode. Getting cleats was always a problem. My brother, the Junior American Legion star, always got the shoes. Somewhere I found dried out hand-me-downs, oversized, felt like they had pebbles inside. After a Legion game, hanging around the locker room of the town's pro team, I lifted shortstop Crane's narrow new spikes. Jesus, they looked slick. Too tight and hard to run fast in, but I wore them anyway. A grown man with a foot smaller than an 8th grader's. My friend Gordon said, "Where'd you get those shoes?" And I, "What do you want to know for?" Gordon didn't play ball. "Those look like Les Crane's shoes," he said. A brick fell in my gut. "You don't know what you're talking about," I said. He jabbed his finger at my cramped feet. "Those are Crane's shoes." That's all he said and left the field. That's all I ever heard about the crime. Who was it that didn't do me the favor of arraignment? Who told fatherless Gordon to charge me? My father's life. My father was the steadiest man I ever knew. In the end, never saw him on his back until the day he died. My father's life. Did his voice go high as well as deep, you ask? I tell you, it was a high baritone, his voice, but it had depths. And I'll tell you how he got over my father. 30 years after the proclamation, black men and boys still got snatched, bought and sold for labor where he was born. But understanding he wasn't the kind to survive that unkindness, he fled at age 14. Lean and light on his feet, I imagine. I have seen his physique in a fleet brother, a son, and a nephew. 6 feet tall when major leaguers were 5'8", and I know he could run. And he ran from King Cotton and turpentine and railroad ties, from knee-deep slime and coal mines, from beatings, from leg chains, from sweat and puke in creaking prison wagons. Don't know exactly where, but he did go a-roving. 2 stints in the Army, a cavalry soldier at Fort Huachuca in Arizona. The black discharge paper with the white writing says he left service at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri after the Great War. Character, good. Hoboing during the time of the birth of a nation. Knew of lynching, knew of riots, running for his life. In a state named for a founder who held slaves, settled on the freedom of pick and shovel on a highway, and a woman of infirm health but compatible soul. Got a job hauling garbage for the town. Got 4 children during the Great Depression. And in a cramped house with no plumbing and little coin, got to trusting in Jesus. Pentecostal fire filling house and yard to the curb. Daddy. Every day, every living day, he walked to the city barn to his garbage truck. Except the years he drove the Chevy he bought with his veteran's bonus. Mother never stopped chiming that he didn't put the money into making the house fit. Every evening he read the Bible and prayed. During the even greater war, he didn't run to Seattle or Portland for work in an aircraft plant or shipyard, but stayed in the valley where we kids behaved. And grade school was books, good paper, pencils, lavatories, and middle-aged white schoolmarms, where there was the quiet left by young men gone to war. And Sundays meant church, where he preached the gospel and kept a fire going in the pot-bellied stove on holy winter mornings. Of course, not to be swallowed by me, his vision of thorns and blood and bodies rising on Judgment Day that propelled his boots along Maple Street so that we ate and learned to read. The Halloween morning of his stroke, before school, we laid him on the Davenport in the front room, one side of him already dead. He sang as I went out the back door to school and more school, stumbling from Alabama to Alabama to finally hear his final singing. Jesus keeps me near the cross. My father's life. Thank you. Thank you. Portrait, library wall. I've always been interested in presidents. And I used to spend quite a bit of time in the Grant High School library, where there's a nice painted portrait of U.S. Grant. And I remember one spring day in there, it was just very hot. And I don't know if the portrait was talking to me or not, but anyhow, I got this little poem. Portrait, library wall. Suspended on canvas above the periodicals rack, in civvies with cravat, he's boozy in the cheeks, broken blood vessels, hint of the battlefield beard. His truth lumbers against me in the late spring heat, a desiccated cause, this image. Yes, it's hot in here, and I'm for granting old soldiers anything they want to drink. Might stop his rasping. For pity's sake, Corporal, a drink, so I can study. But I doubt a drink would douse the thirst he's got, nor temper his history. The sprinklers here look untested. Nope, they couldn't save him. If he starts to burn, he'll be ashes quicker than Atlanta. Moving to a neighborhood. 35 here. Down the street in the days of fishtails, I think we're looking for here. Used to have a neighbor that this reminds me of. Down the street in the days of fishtails, you know those Cadillacs with those big fins? He pursues leavings, scuffling he calls it, for his living. Stacks of the out of style and broken hide his house. He pads through them, survivor of prison and surgeries, too old for bipping and bopping now. He fishes out the saleable and carts the twice left to the dump. One day I saw a used up burro standing in his truck, waiting, nose against the back window, and thought I saw all of us. Smoke rusts the air around his chimney. The old lady's not home, and he's using the fireplace to burn insulation off copper wire. She don't dig that, but the stuff sells. Old Cadillacs, apotheoses of his junking dreams, stall at the curb. Evenings he bends under the hood of one of the ravaged fishtails, head and shoulders stuck in the greasy throat of General Motors. Sometimes he gets them to cough and turn over, perhaps buck and thunder to the end of the block, but they never really find salvation. He still bets, though, as the multitudes do, that one of these mornings he's going to step out and find a sunrise-colored New City coupe crouched at the curb, grill gleaming like new teeth, himself reflected black in the brilliant glazing. He'll ease his ass behind the wheel then and turn the key. He'll slip her into drive. He'll mash the foot feed and gone, man. Showering the plumber with you know what. In the bathroom, the plumber drains my wallet. The late September morning shines. He bangs and curses his pricey bread. You miserable son of a... I crouch and scribble in an upper room over his grunts and snarls, his damming of pipes. Will I wince when he's finished? East-facing walls of bank towers rise glassy-eyed as if from inner happiness and not the simple splash of sunlight that gilds ginkgos and maples. Chestnuts smack the street where cars grind them to easy peckings for sparrows, crows, and jays. It's all about eating. Now his power tool sings a song I know of many pence. His wrenches tinkle when they drop, recalling childhood dimes and quarters that were not copper sandwiches. Did gold coins ring? I don't think so. I never dropped the ones we bad boys stole from the widow, but they did shine. Shine like Long John Silver's in my own lust for showers of coin. This plumber freeing my hot water, I'll shower him with paper. Weekend drawing. One time I was immersed in painting and drawing, and we used to go to up to the medical school before OHSU on the hill, and in the anatomy lab draw cadavers, which is an old-time practice for drawing and painting students. And this recalls that. Weekend drawing. New lovers that winter semester. Saturdays we climbed the hill in the old grade Plymouth to draw cadavers at the medical school. If he was around and heard our heels in the empty corridor, Dr. Bacon, the anatomy chief, would stop us to talk about a drawing course he'd taken years ago from a dying sculptor we knew. We shivered at first, in the lab's chill with our stillest models ever. We kept our coats on, eyes fixed on marking our Strathmore sheets. The sweet, greasy scent of phenol, glycerin, and isopropyl on dead flesh, pinched noses tuned to turpentine, linseed oil, and cobalt dryer. 60 bodies, true remains after weekday slicing at rest on stainless steel tables. With time, we shed coats and walked among them, exploring under vinyl covers and moisturizing cloths for progress in these undressings to the bone by those absent other students. From among organs, homunculi, a chimpanzee in jars of yellowed fluid, Rembrandt and Akins lectured. We listened. Quickened by the cold and quiet, we tried to make our markings sing. Weekend drawing. In the domestic vein, morning serenade. I used to be the noisy one in the house when my son was still living with us. Morning serenade. My wife and son dream upstairs. In the kitchen, I wash last night's dishes. Alto and baritone voices utter syllables that flock into news on National Public Radio. Red numbers glow on the face of the little radio. 6 3-0. Interlude piano, water sloshing, the clink and ping of dishes, my own Alborada. 9 months ago, a short blew a bullet-sized hole in the door of the dishwasher. Hasn't worked since. Around the hole, a sooty nimbus. Warm, soapy water loosens and silkens my fingers. They'll wake up fussing if I played the piano this early. In Spain, 3 policemen have died from a car bomb. Basque separatists claim credit. Generations of men and women sob. A toddler clutches a fistful of dark skirt, stares into the near distance. Morning serenade. Smell theory. I think that's the one on the broadside, huh? A few years ago, when my wife had a studio downtown, just abutting on the Burnside Bridge. Some of you might remember it was the place where they put mannequins up in the windows, shocking sometimes. There's a fire in there, and this recalls that. Smell theory. We hugged. Her thick black coat told of fire, and the scent was in her hair when she returned from the studio. A tramp, to escape the cold snap, had no doubt got into the lower part of the building and built himself a little fire that prospered too much, that alarmed the street before dawn, smoked out the architects upstairs, and the mannequin shop and the artists above them. One of the neighborhood homeless that roamed below the lofts, perhaps a Nez Perce from up the river, shivering here 10,000 years later without trees or family or animals under steel and concrete that curbed the river. Stiff, puffy guys with cigarettes stuck to lips, trying to keep warm. Maybe a woman with them. They've got coats, but this freeze feels as big as the nation. Smell theory. In the memorial vein, my erstwhile best friend I ever had, who was a lifelong smoker, she leaves the house. Her daughter washed and laid it out in white on Friday morning, her body. Friday, the day for visits to her kitchen, in which we drank years of tea, thickened gin with olive juice, whooped, howled over our history, Cold War, madness in black and white, chaos beyond the waxed linoleum. In stocking feet we skated cupboard to chair, pounded the pine wood table, chanted Eliot and Stevens for the beats, while the beats gathered south of us. Muscular, iambic, lit up days of cigarettes and petite cigars. Thursday, the phone call. No more love and coughing. Laid out for a last look and goodbye, her remains. So dark in the cheek hollows against the white swathing. I enter an ink drawing in my daybook. Her face. My lips to the cool forehead discover her vacated skull, now giving as granite. I begin to get it. Still, as gentle attendants lower her, feet first, down kitchen steps to the van, it's hard not to cry, wait! There's a live shine off the drizzle from her nose. Anniversary at El Paso. Army days. Army Day. May 31st, 1959. Today, 50 years ago already, on our side of the border, inches from painful Mexico, Manolo, corrupted by history and state law behind his counter, eyes skirting my brown face, same hue as his, and the uniform I wore, in defense of his ass, said, I can't serve you, man. That was Texas in 1959. Very educational experience, though, being in the Army in Texas at that time, and one I appreciate. Something from outside the book. The test. This is a little scene outside the Lloyd Athletic Club. The test. Can you help me get breakfast? I'm getting out of my car in the club parking lot. Long hair, surplus pea coat, like maybe he just hauled in from Nazareth on a freight for a photo shoot, some Jesus posters. But she knew me not. I dug in my pocket for a dollar bill. He's medium grimy, but not a true child of material hardship. Knows he's got a right to eat, just a bit off in one of our American ways. My hand brings up 2 bills. One falls to the wet ground. I hand him the dry one, and tinged with stingy, pocket the other. Where are you from? Old Army habit of asking. He says, Colorado Springs. I say, you're not AWOL from the Air Force, are you? Button punched. He wakes into a drone that his father was Air Force, his uncle was, his brother is, that he himself scored 97 on the ASVAB. My goodbye wave doesn't pierce the glaze. He's mumbling that the Navy wanted him for nuclear reactors. I'm hustling for the door. Last thing I hear is 97. Try to test the voice again. You, comma, body. We must beware of calling it ordeal, this long walk, so uneven since the hip joint no longer swivels soundlessly. Not ordeal, but grateful, slower steps. Not spring, but winter in the knees. Ice, maybe in the semicircular canals, falling backward imaginable, but beware of whining in generalities. Not ordeal, just a bit of lurching at Santa Barbara, shuffling behind in the corridor at Heathrow, limping over a careless cliche about relationship on our way home. Badly built stilt walker, hardly hard these days, getting around the block without a breakdown, close to our bony end of the world. But so what? Sing it. You and I have memories longer than the road that stretches out ahead. Sorry. The last part of citizenship is actually a part of a work in progress that I'm calling Article 2. The total work is called Article 2 in 44 parts. And when I got the idea sometime in the early mid-90s, and nobody had ever heard of Barack Obama. It was going to be sort of a historical black voice, the voice of a historical black voice speaking to the presidency, just like that, you know. And it seemed like a fairly comfortable idea, but then this Obama pops up in 2004, and, you know, one had to rethink the thing a bit, or figure out how to get out of what I had started out to do. And I haven't drafted the complete thing, but it's still a work in progress. However, some of it is pretty much finished. I'll read a couple of installments that are in the book, and then maybe one from outside. Want to finish here in a couple minutes. Let's try 3. In it, I just use numbers for the presidents, and I don't name them. Like 2, height 5 feet 7, weight 170 pounds, muscular, depressive, tremor, toothless, snorer, drinker. Not everybody's favorite. Second captain of the kleptocracy. You thought you should have been first. Away from Virginia, other heavy dominion of bloods and whited sepulchres. The piper's son stole a pig and away he run. But seriously, folks, a serious man who, whether you dug his program or not, was not disposed to touch the shit, even while neighbors owned such property. Negro slavery is an evil of colossal magnitude. I sure does agree, Captain. 3, height 6 feet 2, 170 pounds, headaches, depressive, buttock boils, bad teeth, hard of hearing. Oh man, what do you say? We thank you for your fine words that gave what you thought was union a point of departure and something to catch up to one of these days. Oh yeah, there was a whole lot of slaves at your place too, down in the Dominion, and who by their 3/5ness put you in. Too many reports agree. You gobbled some golden meat with your salads, spawned a line that history memorized and keeps broadcasting as if science had not long ago buried the need for all that. You with your little architecture and your nails and your university and your great purchase that added all them slave states. All your erections. Maybe you were great testimony that fumbling with each other in the dark is merely what we does. And it goes on sort of like that. I just included some presidents up to Lincoln, after which things changed somewhat. But I think things might get out of hand if I get into... 28. 28. Height, 5 feet 11, weight 170 pounds. Strokes, 1896. He was only about 31. 1907, 1908, 1910, migraines, disabled. And a little bit of that. Minister of Misapprehension, Count of Contradiction, President of Princeton, who slammed the school door in my face. Why y'all want to go to school? Inauguration Day, the district rang with happy rebel yells. Bands played Dixie. An associate of yours warned that now that Dixie was running things, niggas better look out. My president. You and your boys started wall-to-wall segregation of government workplaces, restrooms, and lunchrooms. You say segregation necessary because of friction between colored and white clerks. Pictures became required for job applicants. Keep my ass broke. Can't get no house. Can't get no shoes. Can't get no pencils and crayons. You, leader of the nation, protector and defender of the Constitution, Exhibit A of the blinker leading the blind, and so on. But it's an interesting subject, just sort of looking at it. Okay, a little closing passage here. At Lompoc. 59. At Lompoc. It's kind of a yearly trip we take to visit the mother-in-law. She'd seen a sleek train at the Amtrak stop by the sea on an earlier outing, the Starlighter, and thought she'd like to go there again when we offered to take her out because it was a sunny afternoon. My elderly mother-in-law through 8 presidents. At the care center, we wheel her to the passenger side, and I brace myself in front of her and say, "Put your arms around my neck, Pat, and I'll lift you up." "I can't raise my arms," she says. Hands under her armpits, I get her standing with Ann's help from behind, on her feet, still of substance, old Girl Scout from the Hudson River Valley, able to turn and sit in the passenger seat, her eldest daughter's hand on her head, guiding her in. Past fields of artichokes, lettuce, and sweet peas, snapdragons, sweet William, marigolds. She's digging the colors in the air and being away from the bed and room at Lompoc Skilled Care and Rehab. Still a reader, too, and smart, though insulated and raised on the national pap that dodges hard historical fact. She says to her daughter, beaming, "We were worried about you," remembering 40 years ago when the girl and I first darkened the family doorstep. At the beachside station, the digital readouts red letters tell that the train is running late. A small crowd waits. "You two go look at the water." So we get out to look. At the entrance to the surfing beach, a guy in a dark suit whose white letters on the back say Beach Patrol is saran wrapped in conversation with a hefty blonde in Air Force camouflage. Sergeant stripes on her sleeve. Wrapped, one of those thick, forgettable conversations in an unforgettable space neither dared to locate by name. Breathing air heavier than we breathe. Work hours, no place to check in for a martini or a couch. On the beach below, whitecaps foam to nothing. A line of birds cleaves the distance above the water. From the wing action, they could be pelicans. Beach grass. Ammophila. No surfers. Halfway down the sandy slope, a family with children, canvas chairs, magazines. We rejoin her at the car. Red lights flash, and there's clanging. Travelers gather themselves for a quick boarding. Waiting welcomers ready their arms. Here it is, what we once called streamlined. She says, "Look how high those cars are." A young woman in olive green alights for a few fast puffs. Puff, puff, the way engines used to. People headed south get on, and arrivals get hugged in the parking area. The conductor leans out and waves to somebody up the line. All aboard is in my head. Smoking woman drops her cigarette, steps on it, and climbs back on, leaving us to wind back to town, off the main highway, looking to see more marigolds. At Lompoc. I don't know why all these good things happen in California. It's pretty dry down there. I think for the last one I will read At Santa Ana. A couple of years ago, my son and I accompanied my son down there because he wanted to attend a martial arts seminar with some Japanese sage guru type where they whacked each other around in this gym for a few days. But it was very nice hanging out at the motel and getting a visit from a friend a little farther down the way. Bliss at Santa Ana. Poolside, looking up from the Times picture and prose record of massacres at mosques, in malls and other venues. Loosed from newsprint, I see across the hotel parking lot a man and woman embracing, giving body to time, holding it in the post-noon sun. A flashy, nondescript couple, not old, not young, No patina of glamour or wealth. Her lush arms hang sleeveless about his neck, and his face sinks into hers for the death-defying drink. Thank you.
So, some questions?
If anybody has any questions, please speak now or hold your peace.
Tell us about meeting Jackie Robinson.
Well, gee, actually, I did meet Jackie Robinson. At one time I was a counselor at Boyce Elementary School in Portland, and Jackie Robinson came to visit the school. And he talked to the students for a little while, and I escorted him around a little bit and got to meet him. He was a very nice fellow. He was a Republican, but he seemed he seemed quite nice. That was in gee, it must have been 1964 or so. One thing I realized that I had spent a lot of time as a kid trying to play baseball, and it really came home to me what a mistake that was. When I shook hands with Jackie Robinson, sort of stood beside him. He was only about 50 years old, but boy, his body was just something different. It was a whole different thing. You know, this thick and strong, yeah. My older brother was like that too, but I couldn't see that.
What school was it, Harold?
Boyce Elementary School.
Boyce?
Yeah.
Boyce Elliott Humboldt.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what it is now.
right.
It was Reuben P. Boyce Elementary for years and years and years. Reuben P. Boyce was an early Supreme Court justice in the state of Oregon. Yeah. The kids, of course, called it Boise. But yes.
At what age did you first start writing poetry?
Whew. Well, I wouldn't call it poetry, but in high school, I was on the newspaper staff, and whenever they needed some doggerel, I usually was able to whip up some. And then I remember I won a poetry contest in my junior year, and I thought, yeah, that's something, but it wasn't valued, And my mother actually started the whole thing, I think, by teaching me a Longfellow's Psalm of Life when I was in the 3rd grade. She noticed that I could memorize poems fairly fast. We had to do that at church. So she taught me a Longfellow's Psalm of Life, and it sort of stuck in my head, and it was just something, And I got a few strokes for that at school when my teacher discovered I knew this poem. She had me go around and say it to other classes. And it was just there. But after many, many years, it came to me, this is really where it's at. And I became an English major, and I love poetry, and there's nothing else for me. Yeah. Yes?
You seem to respond so eloquently to the landscape, and
Yeah.
you've lived and visited many places, and I wonder if you have sort of a favorite landscape that you like to write about.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I still think the most powerful aesthetic experience I ever had was the first time I left Yakima and drove up Chinook toward Chinook Pass and saw all those trees. I was about 13, and it was and it hadn't been clear cut, and it was overwhelming. And that's still my favorite thing. And like going to Chicago or someplace and not seeing mountains out there and trees and stuff. I like Chicago, but there's nothing like the Northwest in my experience. Yeah. Italy, you remember liking Italy and Tuscany, in the summer, sunflowers. Well, it's pretty nice too, but something about mountains and valleys. Yes,
How far are you going to go with these presidents?
as far as I can. Well, actually, all of them. I've written something about all of them, but I don't have it worked out. It's still in progress. I'm hoping to finish it this year. Kind of a race against the end, and I'd love to do it before 2016.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Do you have a time or process for writing every day, every week?
Yeah, actually. And well, to say it sort of simply, actually, I basically get up, I try to write 10 lines every day. I'll miss a day here and there, but I try to write 10 lines every day. And it's sort of a prescription I have for myself. Sometimes it'll be based on, maybe for a month, on 5 different words, 2 lines about each word or each phrase. If the Holy Ghost enters, sometimes I will forget about the words and just go with what hits me. And then, I call it the Stafford principle. I don't try to reach the heights. I just kind of try to get something down. And then the next day, part of my process is, say, revising those 10 lines, trying to get more out of them. And I don't think about publishing them or anything, but that keeps me going. And if I do that, I feel okay for the rest of the day. If I don't, I feel kind of jiggly and not too good. Yeah. Yes?
Could I speak to that?
Speak to that, please.
I'm a student. I was at Quincy Adams High School.
And a great singer now.
He was the most inspirational teacher of all time.
Oh boy.
I just have to speak to the 10 lines a day because
Yeah.
that's what he came to me with, because I was really flustered. I was sort of a rebellion English teacher's daughter, and I didn't believe in keeping within the spectrums of punctuation and all of that, and I still have trouble with that. Harold came to me and said, just write 2 paragraphs for me. Anything you want. Don't worry about the punctuation. Don't worry about everything. Just write. Just get it out. So I applaud that he has carried his own advice onto the twilight parts of his life. It's great.
Yeah, Twilight indeed.
Twilight the saga, let's say.
No, hey, it's all right. Yes.
Question about your music background. How did you get started in that and ended up in a band?
I make no claims as a musician. I have played the trumpet, spent a lot of time with piano lessons and practice. I like to practice. I practice better than I play, believe me. And music is as big as anything in life for me. I listen to it a lot and make more noise with it than my some people who live around me might enjoy at times because I tend to play and sing the same things over and over. But I started playing the trumpet when I was 12 years old. Actually, the trumpet I think of as the first thing I loved besides my mother. Actually, I was 9, and I couldn't get one. Money was very short in supply. And my older brother had started to play the trombone, but then he wouldn't practice. It had been discovered that this kid was really an athlete, and he began to just forget about it. So they weren't going to invest anymore. And I had to wait about 3 years until I could start caddying at the golf course, and then I bought my own trumpet. And I started playing. And played off and on. I was sort of an indifferent trumpet player, but yeah, I enjoyed it and still listen to all the trumpet playing I can.
Is there one more question?
Yeah, right here.
Right here, okay.
Do you ever write poetry about your paintings, or do you ever paint something from your poetry?
Actually, there's a poem in here at the Jackson Pollock retrospective in Los Angeles. That's very much about painting for me. Painting it's art, but that's about all I can say about that. I don't. And then actually, there's a poem of there's a Vermeer poem in here too. Art is always in the head.
But I meant your painting.
No, I don't. I don't remember ever writing about any of my paintings. No. Yeah.
I just want to share that you did a portrait of me when I was 19 years old.
Yeah.
And I treasure it.
Yeah. Yeah, that was kind of an inspiration. I remember your mother liked it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's funny, David and I were in art school together way back when, and I remember we hung around a lot. David actually introduced me to the camera, but I painted that, and I remember David, at a certain point, David said, "Don't touch it anymore." Don't. And he brought it over recently after about 40 years, and it doesn't look too bad.
And I had hair.
Big Bird?
And I had hair.
Yeah, oh yeah, you had plenty of hair. Okay, Tom?
What a great evening. Let's get
Thank you.